What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Closing the Deal. I'm your host, Sam Enright. Sitting across from me, my co-host, Zach Dixon. Zach, what is up, brother? How are you?
I am fantastic. Having a great morning this morning. How about you?
Oh man, it's been a good day. It's been a real good day so far. The energy levels are high. I don't.
Off the
Some days you
charts
just
high.
yeah.
Like,
Some days you just wake up and you just got it. You know what I mean? And you just ride that wave.
yeah, I mean, when you have a Duke and Duchess 32-ounce coffee, it's hard not to. You know what I
Hey,
mean?
I just want to give a shout out to the good folks down at Duke and Duchess that have just been keeping this guy going all week. You guys are something special, underappreciated out there. If you guys have not, get down to Duke and Duchess, get yourself a little 32-ounce coffee. You'll thank yourself later.
$1.59. That is especially what you'll thank yourself for.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm telling you.
Absolutely. I guess inflation is not caught up to Duke and Duchess yet. So go ahead, get over there, get you a $1.50 coffee.
They got everything you need: breakfast sandwiches, hash browns, coffee, the creamer, the sugar, all the above. Anything you need. One-stop shop, baby.
There you go. There you go. Well, guys, we are bringing you guys an episode today talking about how to buy and sell your home simultaneously. I know obviously a lot of our stuff has been geared towards first-time home buyers, but some of you guys out there, maybe already own a home and kind of looking to see how to navigate those waters of wanting to sell as well as purchase, your next home simultaneously and kind of the steps that go along with that. So I think, Zach and I have a pretty good grasp on, some things to just kind of look out for and ways to make that process go a little bit smoother for you when that time comes.
Absolutely, because I know that we've talked about on previous episodes just how many moving parts there are in general with a buying transaction. So now you're multiplying that by two and doing two transactions at the same exact time. And so obviously there's just double the moving parts, and everything else is happening just a little bit faster, I think, than what you would when you have just a one transaction in place. So just a lot of moving parts, a lot of different things that you got to take into consideration. And it kind of goes back to our first episode of the how to buy a home series. Surrounding yourself with the right team really matters when you're trying to buy and sell simultaneously. So super excited for the episode for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely like doubling up and, just a lot going on. So, I kind of think that leads us, ultimately into our first, probably the biggest one that we talk with most people about because most people don't want to be homeless. So I think timing is probably the biggest thing. First and foremost, when you set out on this journey is, okay, what does it look like, getting your house on the market? What's it look like? Obviously putting an offer in, because you don't want to get your house on the market, get it in contract, and then not have a house that you are already in contract to purchase. You're out there for 2 weeks looking for a home to buy, and yet your home's already 2 weeks down along in the contract process of new buyers. You know what I mean? And so, how do people navigate kind of that timing of everything and kind of to figuring out how to, when to list the current property and obviously when to start looking for, the new one?
Yeah, it's really all about situation. It's really situation dependent, in my opinion. I always like to advise clients to take a look at the market as a whole. Just see what's going on in the market, and I think that's going to dictate where we move first and foremost with this process. And I would say, generally speaking, it's probably best in a seller's market to find a property that you're ready to buy first and foremost. Because it is a little bit more tough to get into contract when you're in a seller's market. And so on the vice versa, when you're in a buyer's market, it's likely better to find a buyer that's going to be a little bit more hard to procure first and foremost, and then tackle the easier task second. So in a seller's market, I would recommend finding a property to buy first and then listing your property. In a buyer's market, vice versa, would definitely recommend finding a buyer for your property that you're selling and then going out to, buy or find a property to buy after that. So it's really just dependent on your market conditions and your specific situation as well. Again, everything is negotiable. So if you do go kind of backwards in that scenario, you can always go back to that party and kind of negotiate a timeline to work out a little bit better. A good example would have been a client that I had, I think 4 years ago. We were in a very, very hot seller's market, and we actually went vice versa. We went the other way around, listed her condo first, and found a buyer pretty quickly. And unfortunately, we're not able to get into contract to buy anything very shortly thereafter. And we unfortunately had the buyer calling us, pretty much daily, trying to figure out, get an update on what our buying status was. And unfortunately ended up having to terminate the contract with the potential buyer until we were able to find a property to buy for my seller. So again, it really just depends on market conditions as a whole before we make that first step, and then just your specific situation as well, what your timeline looks like, and then all of those factors as well.
Yeah. And I think, maybe in our haste, we may have skipped probably one of the more important first parts as well, which was, we've labored on this a lot on this podcast, which is, you know, probably reaching out to your lender first and foremost to get a pre-approval letter just to kind of see where the situation looks. Just because obviously you bought a house 2, 3, 4 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that things have not changed. Obviously, if you ask most people, their credit score, their income, most of the things that were 4 years ago. Like if you ask me, I'm not in the same position that I was, 4 years ago that I am in today. So getting those things updated, taking a look at, you know, the finances of what you're expecting when selling the house, where you're looking to go when buying. I mean, I know a lot of people typically, when you go from house to house, a lot of the times, a lot of people we work with is, you're ready to upgrade. You know what I mean? We deal with a lot of, like I said, first time home buyers. And so when you're first buying your house, it's just kind of dipping your toe in the water. And then now maybe you've gotten married, you've had kids, and now it's time to expand a little bit. And, people like to upgrade. So, when you're buying, when you first bought a house at 170 or 200,000, now you're trying to go up to 350. That also is another thing to take into account is, things change, from that perspective. And what do we need to do? How do we need to structure everything in order to make sure that we can get you to that price point that you're looking to? So I think first and foremost, even before we start, thinking about listing or purchasing, is obviously reach out to your lender, whether that's a new one or your previous one. And kind of getting a game plan put in place on, hey, this is what we're kind of looking at, here's where we need to go, because there's a lot of things. Everybody's a little bit different. Some people, if you've only owned a home for a year, you're not going to have built up as much equity as somebody else. Obviously, in the first year, a lot of interest is being paid and not a whole bunch of principal. So when you walk away from that property, your expected net proceeds may not be very much. And if that's the case, where the new down payment funds coming from for the new property, those sort of things. Or if it's, I need a bridge loan because I don't want to move from this property until I have somewhere to go. What kind of things do those look like, with obviously a bridge loan, and just different things. So I think reaching out to lender first and foremost, kind of getting a game plan there is most important.
Definitely, and just obviously we'll touch on it a little bit more as we move into the episode. But doubling back on that as well, the need to talk with the lender can kind of dictate how you move forward. Obviously, as well, just based on your own property. Do you need to sell that first property to buy the second property, or can you keep it? Like that's a conversation that you should definitely have in addition to the pre-approval process as well. But just going backwards a little bit on the timing in general. Usually, when you are listing your property and buying at the same time, usually you're going to have home sale contingencies in there as well to make sure that you're protecting yourself. If you are unable to find a new home or unable to find a new buyer, you're able to get out of the contract without any penalty towards you. The example that I used in previously, that was exactly what happened. We had a home sale contingency in there and was able to get out of the contract with no penalty towards the buyer or the seller as well. So that's just one thing that definitely recommend having in there if you're looking to buy and sell simultaneously. Make sure that you're having your home sale contingencies in there to protect yourself and or your potential buyer as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's super important. I mean, we see that a lot, obviously. I mean, in most cases, when we deal with clients from a financing side of things that are, trying to buy and sell, usually it's going to be one of those things where we're doing both simultaneously. But Zach did touch on a good point. there on the financing side of things, we do have clients who, instead of having to kind of worry and coordinate everything, they will hold off on selling their current property. They'll try to get approved for a loan with both mortgages, and then obviously make the purchase on the first one, while holding the original property and then selling that after, because obviously that gives you the ability to kind of move in and not really have to worry about the sort of timing and coordination of it all. You can kind of do one step, by one step, with sell or buying first and then selling after. So, the financing side for things when it comes to buying and selling, at the same time is pretty straightforward. I mean, nothing's ultimately really going to change. In a super large way comparative to just buying a home without selling one. The biggest things that we normally look for is, usually when people, like I said, when you're kind of upgrading, we look, are you putting a larger down payment down? Can we get you into a different type of loan program? Has your credit gone up? If maybe you had to buy conventional because you were first time home buyer looking for a low down payment amount, you've owned your home for 5 years, you've been working on your credit, you're up into the mid 700s, and now you have this large chunk of equity. Are you wanting to put all of that down, or are you wanting to put partial of it and use the rest to pay off some debt? These are all conversations that we obviously have in the beginning. And, if you do own a property and are trying to buy a new one, and you do have equity built up, it does open the doors, I feel like, a lot more for you, than somebody who's kind of limited on down payment funds and those sort of things in the beginning, because obviously, you're going to have to try to work with that and try to get into a house with very minimal cost. Whereas if you've, built 50, 60, $70,000 in equity, your options, open a lot wider. So, yeah, from a financing side, obviously, we look at down payment, we look at, have liabilities changed? Have you taken on more debt? Do we need to use some of those proceeds to pay off debt in order to get your debt to income ratios in a place where you can afford to buy that next home that maybe is a level up? And then obviously we talk with people about, with that equity, do you want to save money back? Some people are like, I want to dump all of the money that I made, that I got from this house into the next one. Some people are like, I kind of want to split it down the middle. I'm expecting 70,000. I like to put 35 towards this. I'd like to keep 35 for myself, just in case of a rainy day. And so really the options become a little, limitless really on how you want to do it, on that side in the financing side of things.
Definitely great information there for sure. I think on the financing side, the biggest question that I would have as a potential buyer slash seller would be how would it affect my purchasing power if I decided to keep my property, my first property, and rent that out? Obviously, as a profit. Say my mortgage payment is somewhere around $1,000, and I'm getting 1,600 in rent, so I'm profiting $600. How does that affect my purchasing power if I were to hold that property, the first property, and go to buy a second one?
So rental income is a little bit, it just depends. So in this case, obviously, you're mentioning someone who currently holds this property as a primary residence. They have no rental history, and so if you're saying, I want to buy a house, I'm going to move out of my current primary, make the new house my primary, and I'm going to turn this, now primary into an investment property, you technically have no rental income history. So you will have not filed a Schedule E on your tax returns, reported gross income or rent receipts with, your breakdowns, and showed that on your tax returns. And so the loan guidelines are pretty specific for people that don't have that history. The most that you can do is typically wash out a payment. You're not going to be able to actually use a perceived amount as an income. So let's say you're like, well, my mortgage is only 1,200 and I'm going to rent it out for 2,000. But if you have no rent history of renting it for 2,000 for 12 months, the loan guidelines are not just going to say, okay, yeah, we'll give them $800 in income, because they said they're going to rent it out for 2,000. That's not how it works. Typically what's going to happen is, if that's something you want to do, we'll do what's called a rent schedule. We'll send an appraiser out to the property. They will take comparable properties in the neighborhood or in the area and determine a base rent, that they could expect for that area, that it would, that you could get ultimately. And then the lenders are going to say, we'll take 75% of that, and that can be considered towards washing out the payment. So, if what comes back of the 75% is 1400, yet your mortgage payment is 1200, we're not going to give you the credit for the 1400. We're going to max it at 12. And so ultimately it still can be a benefit because you are just completely washing that payment from your debt to income ratio. But if you're needing a little extra juice, you're needing a little income from the property in order to qualify for the next one, obviously that's where you could have a little bit of issues because you're not going to get income from the property until you've rented it for a full tax year and have a full, tax, 12 months of rents received on a tax return.
Yeah, it's great info for sure. Because again, we've talked about just different options when you are holding your property or when you buy real estate. You have a lot of different options that you can decide to do. Obviously, you can live in that property for the entirety of your 30-year loan term. You can move as soon as you want and sell the property. But sometimes, obviously, when you try to sell in a quick turnaround time, maybe within 1 to 3 years or so, you never really know what you're going to get back sales wise. So renting out your property, becoming a landlord or hiring a property manager can obviously be another option to move up and upgrade into a new property, but still be able to, hold that first property into your real estate portfolio and continue to collect, rental income as well as have that capital appreciation every single year, every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever it may be, however long you hold that property for. So just obviously just gives another option for you as a home buyer and seller. And obviously being able to wipe that payment out of your debt to income ratio entirely would be, it matters a lot for sure. Even
Yeah.
if you're not getting that extra rental income, that, $1,000, $1,200 monthly mortgage payment can eat into what you can afford on that second property. So just
Oh, absolutely.
all about options for sure. Just all about
Yeah.
options all in all.
And that's why, I mean, ultimately we go back to, discuss your plans with your loan officer first. Obviously if that's something you're looking to do is to buy and to sell or to rent or whatever the case may be, start having a conversation with your lender. Just let them know, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. Is this feasible? Is this possible for me? And obviously, they can take a look over the entire loan profile and determine if that's going to be something that, can be possible for you, and let you know what options are open. And then from there, you can kind of go back to your drawing board and decide, okay, what makes the most sense? Do I want to rent this property out? Do I want to deal with that? Do I want to sell it? Do I just want to get out? And all those sort of things. So, but again, that's why we always harp on, pre-approvals. Even when you own a home, a pre-approval for the next home is still very, very important because, you'd be surprised how many people we talk to that own homes that, had late payments on a credit card that had no clue about it. And now they're sitting at, a mid 500 credit score. And they're like, I had no clue. You know what I mean? And so it's those things. Just because you bought a home once doesn't necessarily mean that your situations are the exact same and it's going to be a slam dunk the next time. So really important to make sure you have that conversation with your lender.
Definitely. Definitely. So moving into our next little part of the episode here is really about the coordination of the two contracts itself. And the number one thing that comes down to, in my opinion, is you're hiring a right real estate agent and an experienced real estate agent on both sides of the spectrum as well. Again, like I mentioned to begin with, there are two times the amount of moving parts when we're doing this twice. So again, two home inspections, two home appraisals, two different title companies, two different, closings, whatever it may be, et cetera, et cetera. So if you as a home buyer slash seller are getting phone calls and emails from two separate title companies, it can be easy to mix those up, honestly, between the two contracts. Obviously, if you have an appraisal going on for one property and an appraisal happens for the other property, it can be easy to mix those up as well. So again, just being able to coordinate all of these moving parts between the vendors and different things throughout the contract is really what your real estate agent is there for. To be, a positive force for you in this process, because again, it can be easy to screw up as a buyer slash seller when you're not a professional in this industry. Unfortunately, it can be very easy to do so, even for professionals. So always definitely recommend hiring an experienced agent to navigate these situations. And especially when you get into, home inspections and you are now negotiating request to remedies on both sides of things. There are repairs that need to be done on your home that you're selling. There's repairs that need to be done on the home that you're buying. Those come with financial costs as well. And so just having a real estate agent that's able to navigate both sides of the spectrum and keep all of the details straight between both contracts is honestly just a major key when you decide that you want to buy and sell at the same time. Because again, as a buyer slash seller, that's going to be very difficult for you, in my opinion, all in all. So
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot. Let's just be real. So, I mean, it's a lot just taking on one transaction, let alone two. So, um, I second all of that. I think it's really important to obviously have a great agent. I mean, and if you can, my suggestion would be, I know obviously we've talked about it. Typically, the seller gets to choose, title companies. So, on your sale, you would ultimately get the choice in that if you wanted to, but on your buy transaction, if you could lobby for yourself, it's always easier from a lender perspective if both transactions are happening with the same title company. So, I mean, if that's something that you can help negotiate or try to navigate, it just makes it so much more seamless, especially if you're using proceeds from the sale of your home towards your purchase. That title company will already have those funds on hand. They don't have to be sent to another title company. You don't have to coordinate with multiple different people, all trying to get the same thing. Yeah, I do believe that there are ways that obviously you can make the transaction smoother for yourself. There are things obviously with buying and selling that you don't get to dictate. When you're the buyer, you get to dictate who your lender is. When you are taking on a buyer for your property, obviously you're not going to be able to dictate who they use as their lender on the transaction. But I mean, if you could lobby to get same title company, obviously having same representation for both your buying and your selling from the same agent, all those things just make the transaction that much smoother if you can. We've actually had a couple of transactions, oddly enough, that we've worked on both sides. We've had, my dad actually had a loan where they were buying one of the properties that our seller was selling, and then our seller was actually buying another property as well. So it was like this, just kind of this thing in a line. So we had kind of control over that one at Kaysen, being in house and those sort of things and making sure the timelines kept up. But that's very, very rare. Typically, you're going to have a buyer who's working with a completely different lender, and you're going to be working with your lender. But yeah, just those little things, obviously, with the coordination and just picking the right team, again, like we talked about, can make that transaction much smoother for you.
absolutely. The last kind of point that I wanted to touch on with the coordination, all in all, is really just moving logistics and how that works out. As a real estate agent, obviously, when we're writing the contracts, we're going to be writing in there a closing date. Obviously, those are subject to change depending on what happens throughout the contract and whatnot. But we'll also be putting a possession date in there as well. And so making sure that those possession dates line up. Number one, when you write the contract, but number two, when slash if anything pops up throughout the contract, making sure that those still line up at the end as well, is key, is for sure. Because again, you want to be making sure that you are coordinating those dates to the fact that you don't have housing. You don't want to be in a 2 day span where you don't have anywhere to go, anywhere to stay. So usually I always recommend to have the property that you're buying first and foremost, have that possession date first, and close on that first if at all possible. And so you're able to have a couple of days to move all of your stuff out of your home that you're selling into the home that you're buying. And then at the point, once you're done moving out of the home that you sell, obviously that's available to be moved in by the new buyer. And at that point would be a good time to close on that. So just making sure that those possession slash closing dates line up, is key as well in the coordination things, of that side.
Yeah, definitely important. We've seen some bad situations before on this side with like people just they did not do the math correctly, and so like their closing date, possession date, and then they're like, oh my gosh, we have a gap of 4 days, and then it just puts pressure on everybody because then you go to that lender who's working on maybe the buy side, which is going to be essentially leaving you in that gap. Like we got to close this earlier, so the possession date starts earlier because obviously possession always goes off closing date, and if you move the closing date up, then realistically the possession date would move up. But it's one of those things where it just, if it's not done properly in the forefront, then now you're adding added pressure to multiple sides of a transaction that already has pressure coming from the fact that this is, a multiple, you know, in a ladder, basically, that this thing has, domino effect. This has to happen, and then this has to happen, and then this has to happen. And now you're asking for one of these things to move up so that this can happen earlier and, to cover the tracks of that. And it's just obviously make sure you're doing the proper math with your agent and that sort of thing beforehand. So you don't, end up homeless for 2 days and wondering what the heck happened. So So yeah, that would be my only suggestion as well. I mean, we've seen that a couple of times on our end. For the most part, most people, get it, you know, long enough, so, but yeah, just be careful. You don't want to end up homeless.
Definitely. And the probability of making of everything going right when you have to change all of those things, like every single leg of those things going right, like it's not going to be a good situation all in all. So you definitely want to make
Yeah.
sure that you're outlining those things before it starts and making sure it's clear and concise and everybody understands what's going on. So
Yeah, especially, I mean, we've had transactions where the buyer is buying with a home sale contingency and then the seller is buying with a home sale contingency. And so now you have three transactions basically because the buyers of this, of the seller's house have to not only sell their house, then to buy that one. And then it just goes down the line. And so, yeah, when you really think about that, we all know this is life. Things don't go perfectly. So even on just regular transactions, you're a buyer, you don't own a house, and you're buying from a seller who's not buying a house, and it's just one of those things where they're selling and you're buying. We still run into problems. We still run into things that happen. And so now add three of those into the transaction. Now you have all these different things going on. You have three sets of buyers, three sets of sellers. It's just a lot of moving parts. And especially if you're with three different lenders, three different title companies, that's three different appraisals, three different home inspections. There's just so much that is moving that could go not wrong, but obviously things that can come up that can cause a delay. And it's only magnified when you get into those sorts of transactions because, if you're not waiting on something else and it's just like, oh, yeah, it's going to be a 2-day delay, no big deal. If nobody's waiting on anything, that's fine. But now, if you got other people that are waiting and now you're talking about a 2 to 3 day delay, that it just starts to magnify the situation, and there's going to be a lot of emotions surrounding it from all angles. So just be prepared. When you do it, it's not, I wouldn't try to talk anybody out of doing it because for the most part they do go pretty seamlessly, but there are always some of those transactions that just come up and you just have no clue. It comes out of the blue. I mean, we have one right now that the lady she sold her house yesterday. She has 30 days possession. She's supposed to be buying this other property. It's a condo, and the transaction was going smooth as all get out for 21 straight days. And then, we're thinking we're going to close later that week. And we literally find out a problem with the HOA, and we've been on 10-day delay since then there's nothing the lender can do. There's nothing the agents can do. All we can do is keep bothering the HOA to get what they need. But ultimately, it's just kind of a waiting game. And I talked to her yesterday, and she's just like, yeah, it's just crazy. Everything. She's like, this is one of the smoothest real estate transactions I ever had. And now we've just come screeching to a halt. I'm just like, some mortgage business sometimes, unfortunately, there are things that just happen that nobody can foresee. And we got to roll with the punches and do what we do. So
couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. So moving on to our next little portion of the episode today is going to be about pricing and staging as a whole. So just quickly talking about this stuff again. When you're selling your home in general, you want to make sure that you're competitively pricing your property to make sure that it's going to sell without any delays. But this is only amplified in a situation where you have to sell or you need to sell to buy this next property. Again, you want to make sure that you're pricing this competitively so that you're getting an offer within 1 to 2 days of it being on the market and not going, at least 14, 15, 16 days without an offer. And now you have to do a price reduction, and that looks bad to potential buyers. It's something we've talked about in previous episodes as well. That's only going to likely add time onto the days on market as well. So again, just want to make sure that you're competitively pricing your property all in all in general, but especially so when you're in a situation where you're buying and selling simultaneously. And again, anything that you can do to your property before you list it is always going to be a positive, but also amplified in this situation as well. Always recommend staging, always having a cleaning company come in and just give it a quick clean. Smells, obviously, if there are any smells in your property, making sure that you get, some candles lit, stuff like that, whatever it may be. Obviously, you as a homeowner are likely nose blind to some of the stuff that's going on in your own home, but those do make a big difference for potential buyers when they walk into your property. So those are things that we take a look at, and obviously in any transaction, but especially so when we're talking about in a situation where you have to sell to buy.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, hit the nail on the head. So, I mean, it's obviously very important if you're going to be doing that, that you got to get a move on things quickly. So you don't, I mean, a lot of these home sale contingencies have a certain date range. I mean, I'll see them written in the contract, like, your house has to be on the market within a certain amount of days, or you have to have a contract accepted by a certain amount of days, or, the contract's null and void, so obviously there's, when it comes to those sort of things, there's really no messing around, because again, it's just could hold up the whole line of things going on. So people don't, people don't want to mess around with that.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And it makes it a little bit easier when those things are outlined in the contract as well, like specific dates and things like
Yeah.
that. I think it motivates people just a little bit more when you have a deadline to reach. So
Oh yeah. Yep, I could not agree more. I mean, last thing, guys, that we wanted to touch on, I think we already did a little bit, obviously, just flexibility and just understanding, what comes with the territory of these things. If it's one of those, situations where, maybe you have to be prepared to have a place to rent temporarily or move back in with family or something like that. That becomes, that little bit of a gap if you are going to have 2 weeks without a house because you sell and you don't get, possession of your current, or, kind of like we talked about, just making sure that when you negotiate those dates, that there is no, that there's at least overlap, I guess, and not a gap of time where it's just like, multiple days where you're supposed to be without a property. I mean, you don't want to be, putting all your stuff in storage and move into a hotel room for 2 days so you don't so you have a place to live, sort of deal. So just be prepared to be flexible, be prepared to have contingency plans in place, if something is to go wrong.
and with that flexibility as well, I'm gonna say it again, probably for the millionth time, but I'll probably say it 2 million times on our podcast and content in general. But again, everything is negotiable. You can negotiate everything. If you get to the end of the contract and something fell through, you might be able to negotiate a month rent back to yourself as the seller from the buyer to stay in your home for 30 more days after you close on your house that you're selling. Everything is negotiable. Again, you can ask the potential buyer anything. The worst that they can say is no, and then obviously it becomes a negotiation at that point. You can structure your offer a little bit more beneficial to the buyer to get that extra month of possession in your home or whatever it may be. Again, you just need to be flexible with all of the options that are available to you before you get the process started, and again throughout the process as well, because again a lot of moving parts can change things, and so just got to be flexible all in all.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. That's the key to these transactions. Going in with the right mindset and being willing to, again, roll with the punches and just roll with how things come, because not always going to go super smoothly. So just be aware of that. But yeah, guys, I think that all about wraps us for this one. I mean, Zach, you got anything else you want to add on how to buy and sell simultaneously?
I don't, not really. Just enjoy the process. You get to do it two
Yeah.
times, not once. So double,
Yeah.
double the fun.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it for me as well. I think we covered, kind of everything there is to cover on that side of things. But yeah, if you guys, have any questions about anything that we covered, obviously feel free to let us know. But, ultimately, again, as always, appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate you guys, you know, taking the time to listen to our content, like, share, subscribe, all the love and support you guys have been giving us. We're 3 months deep at this point. It's crazy how fast time's gone by, with creating these, but, been really enjoying just, recording podcasts and getting stuff out to you guys every week, and hoping that it brings value. If not right now, at least at some point down the road, when you guys do decide that it's time for you to, start that buying process and, looking for your home. So if you guys haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a like, follow us on Instagram, YouTube. And well, I guess if you follow us on YouTube, that would be a subscribe. So, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. But yeah, that's it for me.
Absolutely, guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will definitely see you guys on the next one.